Hi everyone, welcome back to Radio Night Crime. Before you drift off, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. If you're enjoying the stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now let's relax and jump into tonight's case. Story 1. The Case of Susan Wright, the Blue-Eyed Butcher of Texas. Anger is a powerful negative emotion, during which a person typically seeks to harm themselves or those around them. The English playwright John Dryden once said, "Beware the wrath of a patient man, for he will exact revenge when you have forgotten both the man and the very cause of the long accumulating negative feelings. Pain and resentment will inevitably find an outlet, and a person who always forgave and gave one more chance to make things right can become the most ruthless judge and executioner." The case of Susan Wright, in the early 2000s, shocked everyone with its incredible cruelty, but the merciless perpetrator stood before the court and, it seemed, received deserved punishment. However, several years later, it turned out that not everything in this story was so clear-cut, and a bloody conclusion was preceded by many years of patience, resignation, and silence. This family, at first glance, seemed ideal, but no one could imagine what was happening in their home behind closed doors. But let's try to understand from the beginning the case of the Blue-Eyed Butcher, to comprehend what pushed a fragile young woman, a mother of 2 children, to such a desperate and simply monstrous act. Who is Susan Wright? Susan Lucille Wright, née Witch, was born on April 24, 1976, in Houston, Texas, into the simple family of Velma Sue and Jimmy Lawrence Witch. She was the eldest of 2 children of her parents, raised alongside her biological sister named Cindy. From an early age, Susan was an active and sociable child with creative talents. During her school years, she was seriously involved in dancing and aspired to become a choreographer in the future. The girl had a bright, attractive appearance and a slender figure, always having numerous admirers, and she herself loved being the center of attention. After graduating from high school, despite her efforts, which couldn't get into college. However, she didn't lose heart, deciding to take a short break and save money for her education. For several months, she worked as a dancer at one of the popular nightclubs in the city. There, the young blonde performed topless, gaining some notoriety, which she was certainly not proud of. She decided to quit this job and never return to it, using her savings to pay for evening courses at a nursing school. Susan always aimed for independence, so alongside her studies, she took a job as a waitress in a restaurant to support herself. Soon, she realized that medicine was not her true calling, and she struggled financially to pay for her education. Therefore, the young blonde abandoned her courses, focusing on her work instead. The romance with Jeffrey Wright in the summer of 1997, 21-year-old Susan met her future husband, Jeffrey Andrew Wright. Their first encounter was at the Galveston restaurant where she worked as a waitress, and he stopped by for a meal. He was instantly captivated by the beauty and radiant smile of the blue-eyed blonde, leaving generous tips and becoming a regular customer from then on. Jeffrey took a while to ask her out, but eventually mustered the courage to get her phone number. Susan later recalled that the man began calling her daily, sometimes several times a day, arranging romantic dates and small surprises, like sending flowers with touching notes to her work, and in the evenings, he would meet her and walk her home. The man was 8 years her senior, but this minor age difference didn't particularly bother them. He was attentive, very sweet and caring, quickly winning over Susan. However, it soon emerged that Jeffrey had some issues with alcohol and the use of controlled substances. He claimed to have left drugs in the past and promised to give up alcohol completely. The naive young woman believed him. She was truly in love, for the first time, and felt they could overcome any challenges together. Soon, Susan discovered she was pregnant and hurried to share this happy news with her beloved. Wright seemed pleased at the prospect of becoming a father, but made no decisive moves. He didn't propose, and they continued to live separately. Confused by her boyfriend's behavior, Susan took the initiative into her own hands. She insisted that their first child should be born in wedlock, and her partner simply accepted her conditions. By the time the couple officially legalized their relationship, Susan was already 8 months pregnant. They didn't have a grand celebration with a white dress and a tiered cake, opting for a quiet wedding without guests or witnesses. Around this time, they purchased their own home in the quiet Harris County, Texas, moving in just a couple of weeks before the birth of their child. The perfect family. In December 1998, the Wrights welcomed their first child together, a son named Bradley. In 2001, Susan became pregnant again, and in the spring of 2002, she gave birth to a daughter, Kaylee. The couple also got a small dog named Buck, had their own comfortable family car, and seemingly lived a life that resembled the embodiment of the American dream. Jeffrey worked at a local construction company, and after the birth of their children, Susan, by mutual agreement, became a homemaker. She took care of raising the kids and creating a cozy environment in their family nest. Neighbors, with whom Mrs. Wright maintained friendly relations, spoke of her as a kind, friendly, and sociable young woman, a caring mother, and a loving wife. The family indeed seemed perfect, but as it turned out, the reality was quite different. It was later revealed that her husband was extremely demanding in every aspect. Susan spent her days cleaning, doing laundry, and cooking. Jeffrey only ate fresh, home-cooked meals, and she couldn't prepare meals for 2 days at a time or reheat leftovers. The house had to be in perfect order and cleanliness, a near impossibility with 2 small children. Jeffrey's clothes needed to be washed almost daily, as he wouldn't wear the same item twice. If any of these rules were broken, it led to insults, humiliation, and even physical abuse. Financially, Jeffrey turned out to be extremely stingy. The romantic, who once gifted flowers and presents, was gone, and he now only gave his wife $100 a week. This was meant to cover cooking, maintaining the house, and buying everything necessary for the children. Susan had to account for all expenses to her husband and provide receipts. Jeffrey did not quit drinking as he had promised earlier, but that was just the tip of the iceberg. He began using drugs again. He categorically denied his addiction, referring to his drug use as light doping to cope with work stress and stay in good shape. However, under the influence of these substances, he often became aggressive, capable of hitting his wife or even their young son. Whenever Susan pleaded with him to seek professional help and undergo rehabilitation to overcome his destructive habits, Jeffrey reacted with outbursts of anger. He saw no problem with his behavior, arguing that Susan married him knowing about his alcohol and drug use, and thus, she should now accept and live with it. Remarkably, Jeffrey's parents were also aware of their son's weaknesses. They sympathized with their daughter-in-law, but felt helpless to assist her. The last straw, according to the woman, her husband began displaying aggression towards her almost immediately after they started living together. This manifested in physical, emotional, and intimate abuse. Initially, he would apologize each time, promising it would never happen again, and she wanted to believe him. But soon, Jeffrey stopped apologizing, and the violence in the family became a commonplace occurrence. Jeffrey visited the gym 3 times a week to practice boxing. He said these workouts allowed him to blow off steam, adding that he would definitely take his son with him once the boy was a bit older. On Monday, January 13, 2003, Wright went to the gym after work as usual. He returned home on edge, seeming excited and nervous. While his wife was preparing dinner, he decided to tell his son about boxing and demonstrate a few techniques. At one point, he got carried away, misjudged his strength, and hit the 5-year-old boy. The child burst into tears, and the father tried to soothe him, hoping his wife wouldn't hear. Susan indeed pretended not to notice, but this incident was the final straw for her. After dinner, she went to put the children to bed while her husband remained in the bedroom, where he took another dose of controlled substances. What happened next varies in different accounts. The woman claimed that as soon as she entered the room, her husband attacked her, wrongfully took advantage of her, and attempted to end her life with a knife, but she managed to wrestle the weapon from his hands, and the ensuing confrontation was purely in self-defense. However, her story changed multiple times, and the investigation's version presented at the trial appeared more credible, becoming the official account. Seduced, immobilized, and brutally ended a life, Susan decided to use her dancing skills to seduce her husband and lower his guard. She entered the room in a short silk robe worn over her bare body, performing a tantalizing show for her husband. Then, she suggested a role-playing game involving tying up, to which he readily agreed. She used 3 of Jeff's neckties to bind his hands and right leg to the bed. His left leg was secured with the silk belt from her robe. Once he was immobilized, Susan improvised a gag using her own underwear, adding to the guise of an intimate game. To set the mood, she lit candles and turned off the lights. Jeffrey was bound hand and foot, securely fastened to the bed, with a gag in his mouth surrounded by dim lighting. Initially, Mrs. Wright took one of the candles and poured hot wax on the man's chest. Although painful, it still resembled a part of their game. Then, the same fate befell his intimate area, and soon the pain became unbearable. Jeffrey did not immediately realize what was happening. He tried to free himself, tried to scream, but to no avail. Meanwhile, his wife repeatedly struck him with a small, sharp knife she had brought from the kitchen. She started with the groin area, moving up and down, slashing his genitals, legs, abdomen, chest, arms, neck, and face. At first, Susan acted slowly, voicing her grievances with each strike, recounting the insults, humiliations, and abuse she had endured. Then she began to cry and struck faster and faster. Forensic experts would later count 193 shallow knife wounds on the deceased's body. The majority of these wounds were not fatal, and the man was conscious for most of the ordeal. Her actions indicated she was in a state of despair and intense emotional turmoil, with her lawyers insisting on a state of effect. She couldn't stop even when her husband showed no signs of life, and she hadn't yet considered what she would do next or how she would handle the body. Shallow grave in the backyard for the next several hours. The woman simply sat on the floor next to the bed where her husband's body lay. She then looked around and realized the bedroom was covered in blood, and she needed to act before dawn. Susan cautiously peered out the window, ensuring no neighbors had their lights on, and that it was quiet and deserted outside. Her gaze fell upon a shallow pit that Jeffrey had dug over the weekend to install a fountain in the backyard. A plan formed instantly. This pit was to become the grave for her despised spouse. To move the body from the bedroom to the yard, Susan used a common garden wheelbarrow. This aspect raised many questions for the investigators, as a petite, slender woman managed to single-handedly load and transport a man much taller and twice her weight out of the house. There were suspicions of an accomplice, but these speculations were never confirmed. This seemingly fantastic strength, appearing out of nowhere, gave the defense another argument to insist on a state of effect. Under the cover of night, the woman moved her husband's body into the pit and buried it, though lightly covered would be more accurate. She then showered, removed the blood-stained curtains and bed linen, placing them in several trash bags and dispersed them in different bins. The bloodied mattress was simply flipped over to the other side, as she didn't know what else to do with it. The remaining time until dawn was spent scrubbing blood from the floor, walls, and carpet. The carpet presented a problem, as a large stain proved impossible to remove. Resourcefully, the lady doused it in bleach, hoping the chemicals would destroy any traces of the violent confrontation that had occurred in that room. Assaulted and fled? That morning, Susan called her husband's parents, who lived in Austin, Texas. Sobbing, she informed them that her husband, under the influence of alcohol and controlled substances, had assaulted her and their young son, then wreaked havoc in the house, spilling a bottle of bleach on the carpet, before declaring that he was fed up and leaving her. Jeffrey's parents were shocked. They knew their son was far from perfect and genuinely felt sorry for their daughter-in-law. But upon hearing that he had hit the child, they immediately offered for Susan and the children to come and stay with them for a while. However, the young mother refused. She added that she would file a report with the police and disclose everything that had been happening in their home. 2 days later, Mrs. Wright went to the police station, as her husband's sudden disappearance was raising more and more questions, and something had to be done. She reported that she and her children were victims of domestic violence at the hands of her husband and needed protection. Susan managed to obtain a restraining order against her husband from approaching her and the children, although she already knew very well that her significant other would never be able to come near them again. As evidence, Susan showed bruises and cuts on her arms, which she claimed were inflicted by her husband with keys when she tried to fend him off. There was also a small bruise on Bradley's face, and the boy confirmed that his dad had hit him. At first glance, the story told by the tearful woman sounded quite plausible and logical. Her husband, under the influence of a mix of alcohol and controlled substances, attacked his wife and young son, and then, realizing what he had done, got scared and fled. But as time passed, Jeffrey made no contact, which became very suspicious. It appeared he had run away without his belongings, documents, and even his mobile phone was left at home. The man hadn't shown up for work or at his parents', and none of his friends or neighbors had seen him. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Such behavior is typical of criminals who decide to lay low, but he hadn't ended a life or inflicted serious injuries to warrant such a flight. The horrifying truth, Susan found it unbearable to stay in the house where she had confronted her husband and where his body was buried in the yard. She started to feel as if he were still alive and about to rise from his grave for revenge. She was practically losing her mind, and their dog Buck kept barking and trying to dig up the burial site. On January 17th, having taken her children, the perpetrator went to her mother's house. Her mother was aware of what had happened, but upon seeing her daughter, she realized the full extent of the truth. Velma simply asked, "You killed your husband, didn't you?" Her daughter burst into tears and nodded. She confessed what had happened and revealed where she had hidden the body, repeatedly saying she didn't know what to do next. On her mother's advice, the next day Susan contacted a lawyer named Neil Davis, to whom she confessed to ending her husband's life and trying to conceal her crime. The experienced defense attorney learned all the details, thought through the possible scenarios, and on January 19th called the office of the Harris County District Attorney. Davis reported that Mrs. Wright had ended her own husband's life and buried his body in the backyard, as she herself had confessed and was ready to give a statement at the police station. On January 24, 2003, Susan voluntarily went to the police, stating that she would make a full confession. Her story was disjointed. She got confused in the details and sometimes contradicted herself. She spoke of her late husband as if he were still alive, claimed she was afraid of him and asked for protection. Consequently, she was subjected to a psychiatric evaluation, which revealed a nervous breakdown and depression, but overall, Wright was capable of understanding her actions. The gruesome discovery when the remains of the deceased husband were extracted from the makeshift grave in the backyard. Investigators were astounded, having never witnessed such brutality before. Experts counted 193 knife wounds on the victim's body, 8 in the groin area, about 30 on the legs, 23 on the shoulders and arms, 22 in the abdominal area, for 6 on the chest, 23 on the neck and 41 on the face. Only one head wound could have been the cause of death. All other cuts were superficial and individually posed no direct threat to life, suggesting that the man suffered a prolonged and agonizing death while conscious, as his wife repeatedly struck him with a small knife. Deep marks were found on Jeffrey's wrists and ankles from the ties and belt used by his wife to bind him. The nature of these injuries indicated that the victim had tried to free himself, but was unsuccessful. Notably, the ties and belt remained on the body. Traces of candle wax were also found on the deceased's chest and groin area. Mrs. Wright claimed it was accidental, as her husband had knocked over a lit candle onto himself. But the prosecution believed that hot wax was more likely a form of torture inflicted on the bound victim, meant to cause suffering. In the mouth of the deceased, his wife's underwear was still present, acting as a gag that prevented him from screaming or calling for help. Toxicological reports revealed traces of alcohol and several controlled substances in the deceased's system. Under the influence of such a cocktail, the man could have indeed behaved aggressively and irrationally. The bedroom where the confrontation took place appeared normal at first glance, except for a large bleach stain on the carpet. Susan had spent considerable time cleaning up, which was evident. But once special chemical agents and equipment were used to reveal wiped-away blood traces, the scene presented itself in an entirely different light. Blood was found everywhere, even on the ceiling, and the mattress was thoroughly soaked in it. The start of the trial and the defense's version, the trial of the accused, began at the end of February 2004. By that time, Mrs. Wright had been in custody for a year, and her children were being cared for by her parents and sister Cindy. Her lawyer was well prepared for the trial and had worked extensively with his client. Susan was almost continuously in tears as she recounted that horrific night and the events leading up to it. According to the woman, she had suffered years of abuse and cruel treatment from her husband, but when he started raising his hand to the children, she couldn't bear it. The defendant claimed that on that fateful evening, her husband returned from his training in an agitated state, began demonstrating boxing techniques to their 5-year-old son, and said that the boy would also take up boxing. When a frightened Bradley refused, his father hit him in the face. Susan then put the children to bed and decided to have a serious talk with her husband, urging him to seek help at a clinic. However, he became angry, grabbed his keys, and was about to leave. She tried to stop him, which led to a struggle during which she sustained injuries to her palms and wrists. Then, as the defendant claimed, her husband struck her, causing her to fall and momentarily lose her bearings. When she came to, she saw Jeffrey holding a knife. The woman's testimony became highly inconsistent thereafter, and she couldn't explain how the weapon ended up in her hands. Her lawyer attributed this to a state of affect, arguing that it was why his client, having seized the knife, began to strike and didn't stop until she had inflicted multiple wounds all over her husband's body. Regarding the ties and belt, Susan claimed she attached them to the victim's limbs after the confrontation to secure him to the cart and transport him to the yard. The wax, as previously mentioned, supposedly landed on his body accidentally from a candle on her bedside table that she lit in the evenings instead of a nightlight. However, she couldn't explain at all why her underwear was found in the deceased's mouth. The prosecution's version and verdict, the prosecution's version and arguments were far more convincing and logical. Experts proved that the deep wounds and abrasions on the wrists and ankles were inflicted while the man was still alive, suggesting that the binding was part of an intimate game used by the defendant to lure the victim into a trap. Consequently, the presence of a gag in the man's mouth was also reasonably explained. Furthermore, all injuries were inflicted at a certain angle, as if the perpetrator was above Jeffrey's body or sitting astride him, not in the midst of a struggle, which would have resulted in a different pattern of injuries. All the cuts were made from the front, as the victim was lying on his back and securely fixed. Whether Susan had premeditated her husband's demise and planned to use the pit he dug for the fountain as a grave was not definitively established. However, the prosecution leaned towards the theory that she had carefully planned everything, hoping to receive a substantial sum from insurance. The case received widespread publicity, with Susan being dubbed in the press as the blue-eyed butcher or blonde meat grinder. Jeffrey's relatives demanded the harshest punishment for her, while most neighbors pitied the woman, recalling occasional bruises on her body that resembled marks of physical abuse, which she attributed to her clumsiness. Initially, the prosecutors sought life imprisonment for Mrs. Wright, but later softened their demands to 45 years of incarceration. In March 2004, the defendant was found guilty and sentenced to 25 years in prison. She showed no reaction to the judge's words and appeared completely detached. A year later, Susan's lawyers attempted to file an appeal, but it was rejected. New developments and reduced sentence in 2008, Wright and her defense team filed another appeal. This time, a new witness's testimony significantly influenced the course of the case. The witness was a woman named Misty McMichael, the wife of former NFL champion Steve McMichael. In the mid-1990s, she had a prolonged relationship with Jeffrey Wright, even being engaged to him for about a year. She shared her experiences of enduring physical abuse, humiliations, and cruel treatment from Wright, which led her to break off the engagement and permanently sever ties with him. Considering these new circumstances and the witness's testimony, Susan's prison sentence was reduced to 20 years. In 2014, at the age of 38, she became eligible for parole for the first time, but was ultimately denied. She received a second denial in July 2017. Finally, in the winter of 2020, after spending 16 years in prison, the blonde meat grinder was released. She was 44 years old at the time of her release. Waiting for her outside the prison walls were reporters and photographers, at the sight of whom she burst into tears and pleaded to be left alone. It's worth noting that Mrs. Wright's trial received extensive media coverage and was even broadcast on the National American Television Network Court TV. This story later became the basis for an episode of the popular documentary TV show 48 Hours Mystery, as well as an episode of The Secret Lives of Stepford Wives, titled Deadly Love, which aired in 2014. In 2012, the feature film Blue-Eyed Butcher was released, starring actress Sarah Paxton as Susan Wright. Additionally, in 2014, Canadian documentary filmmaker Chloe Ball released a 17-minute short film titled The Wheel of Fortune, inspired by the trial of the Jeffrey Wright case. Thanks for watching, guys. Subscribe to the channel and also don't forget to click the bell. There are many shocking stories ahead. Story 2. The incident that occurred in late summer 2016 at Spring Creek Park sparked a wave of public outrage. How many similar tragedies must happen before New York City authorities listened to the citizens' pleas? Local residents had repeatedly alerted authorities about the presence of unsettling individuals in the park. Some of them would gather in groups, while others wandered alone. Either way, their appearance evoked a sense of danger. Regrettably, it took a crime for the city administration to finally take action and address this issue. Additionally, the event led to numerous discussions and topics about the safety of female runners, particularly those who exercise alone. According to a survey, 54% of women feel anxious when they go out, fearing they might be subjected to verbal harassment or physical attacks. The story of Karina Vetrano is both horrifying and baffling. Firstly, because nothing seemed amiss on the day of the fateful event. The attack on the woman occurred in broad daylight in a fairly populated area. Secondly, her death has a mystical aspect to it. And thirdly, the investigation of the case, as well as the sentencing of the perpetrator, raised many questions. On Tuesday, August 2, 2016, Karina arranged to meet her father after work. They wanted to spend time together. Since Miss Vetrano had moved, family gatherings had become rare because everyone was busy with their own things. In addition, the young woman was combining two jobs. Philip picked up his daughter and took her to his home. There, the family shared their impressions of the past week. When Karina was about to go home, she asked her father if he wanted to go jogging with her, as they often did, covering several miles together. Her father replied that he couldn't this time. "You see, my back hurts so badly that nothing helps. Maybe a new prescription is needed. Or maybe it's the change in the weather," Mr. Vetrano explained. "Maybe I should call you a cab." The weather was beautiful, the heat had abated, and there was a fresh smell in the air. Therefore, Karina declined the offer. Besides, she was training for the upcoming marathon. The young woman had recently broken up with her boyfriend and wanted to distract herself. A jog would clearly do her good. That evening was the last time the parents saw their youngest daughter. At 5:45 p.m., she left the house for a jog. Her first stop was Spring Creek Park, a cozy, tranquil place buried in greenery, a true paradise amongst the city's infrastructure. However, only part of the park was available for walking. The rest was covered with thickets and swamps. Mr. Vetrano asked his daughter to stick to her usual route, to stay away from unfamiliar paths and people. Unfortunately, Karina ignored his advice. In search of solitude, she decided to go to a grassy, deserted place. Karina's thoughts were abruptly interrupted. She felt a sharp pain in the back of her head, and she fell down. This rash decision cost the young woman her life. A frightening uncertainty entered the Vetrano home. It had been 2 hours since they had said goodbye to their youngest daughter. She should have been home by now, or at least answering the calls of her parents, who were frantically trying to reach her. And she had promised to keep her cell phone to herself. The anxiety was growing. Her father sensed that something was wrong and decided to seek help from his neighbor, the chief of the New York City Police Department. They were on good terms, and the high-ranking official knew that Philip would not make a fuss over nothing. After that, Karina Vetrano was reported missing. Police began searching for the young woman, combing the park area and surrounding streets. As a result, experienced canine units were brought in. As it is known, The first 24 hours after the disappearance of a person are crucial and most informative. Therefore, law enforcement utilized all available resources before nightfall. At the same time, Mr. Vetrano, along with a group of volunteers, searched for his daughter on his own. He scoured the park from end to end, combing the paths and wading through the tall grass, all the while making phone calls. As dusk fell, the man noticed a light in the grass. As he approached, he recognized Karina's phone. Maybe she lost her phone and just didn't let us know. Philip hoped. The patriarch of the family headed toward the police officers, deciding to pick his way through the thicket. Stepping into the grass, he came across something soft. A partially undressed female corpse lay face down. Philip turned it over and saw a familiar face. A desperate scream burst from his father's chest. It was Karina. She hadn't lost her phone like he thought. His little girl wasn't answering her phone because she had been robbed of her life. The realization of what had happened overwhelmed Mr. Vetrano. Hearing the screaming and yelling, the police rushed to him. They dragged Philip away from his daughter's body, trying to explain that this was now a crime scene. Anything in the area was considered evidence. To prevent the evidence from being tampered with, the law enforcement officers asked the father of the touch anything. On the way home, Mr. Vetrano thought a lot. He was tormented by how to tell his wife about their daughter's death. Images of the past flashed before his eyes. He remembered how on July 12, 1986, in Queens, their second daughter was born. Philip had been proud of her from an early age. She was obedient and well-mannered. He vividly remembered taking her to her first day of school, how well she did in her studies. Such education enabled her to earn a higher degree. Karina graduated from St. John's University with a master's degree in speech pathology. She had always dreamed of helping children and worked with autistic kids. His daughter was multifaceted. She loved to travel and write. She adored sports, especially running. Their shared passion brought them closer. She was his inspiration. The father remembered how jealously he treated her suitors. He so wanted her to be truly loved, hoping that she would eventually create a strong family like he and Kathy had and give him wonderful grandchildren. The return journey turned into an eternity. At the entrance to the house, Mr. Vetrano paused, taking a deep breath. I need to be strong to support my family. I have to pull myself together, the man commanded himself. His wife met him at the threshold. Fortunately, he didn't need to explain anything to her. She understood everything from her husband's face. Kathy cried, approached her husband, and hugged him. Soon, Karina's relatives and friends learned of the incident. They struggled to recover from the shock. Believing in the sudden death of the young woman was hard, let alone accepting its violent nature. Ms. Vetrano had been subjected to a brutal attack. This was the conclusion reached by investigators. At first glance, it was obvious that the woman had resisted. Even in death, her fists remained clenched. Bruises and abrasions were found on her once young and healthy body, and her athletic clothing was torn. The autopsy showed that the back of the victim's skull had been damaged by a blunt object, probably a stone. However, the cause of death was asphyxiation. A clear mark was visible on the woman's neck. The forensic examination also revealed the intimate nature of the crime, violence. The experts' findings confirmed the police's initial suspicions. Earth and grass were found under the victim's fingernails, probably in an attempt to free herself from her attacker's grip and escape. Specialists examined her mouth and found her teeth knocked out and cracked in places. She had clearly bitten to defend herself. Even the woman's neck was covered with numerous scratches. She was grabbing with her hands, trying to force her attacker to let go of her. Karina did not want to die and fought hard for her life. Karina Vetrano's youngest daughter, Karina, had a variety of interests, but she especially loved writing. In 2013, she starred in a short movie by her friend and screenwriter Petros Georgiadis, which was based on a poem she had written, Paradox. In her blogs, the girl often addressed complex issues, often touching on the topics of love and the end of life. Shortly after this tragedy, new information was leaked to in Princeton, Massachusetts. The body of another jogger was found among the tall grass. The woman, apparently also out for a walk in a secluded place, suffered a similar fate. At first glance, the cases were identical. Could there be another serial offender in America? The case was taken up by geneticists who were tasked with comparing DNA samples collected from the crime scenes. As luck would have it, unidentified samples were found on both victims. Contrary to police expectations, the analysis revealed no connection between the crimes. It turned out that the DNA samples belonged to different people. Particularly intriguing is the story surrounding the DNA material taken from under her fingernails, on her back, and from Karina Vetrano's phone. The DNA was found in small quantities, but was deemed sufficient for analysis by experts. For a long time, this DNA remained the only lead in the investigation, giving a chance to identify the perpetrator. It is known that most life-ending crimes are committed by someone close to the victim, so the police could not dismiss any possibility. For this purpose, the victim's father provided his DNA as he was the one who first discovered his daughter's body. However, the timing for this procedure was poorly chosen. It took place on the day of Karina's funeral. Later, all of the woman's relatives also underwent a DNA test, which did not give any matches. Detectives decided to interview Karina's relatives and friends, finding out if Mrs. Vetrano had any enemies or ill-wishers. Turned out that there were none. Everyone respected and loved her. Then the investigators developed a new version. The deed was committed from base motives. Someone met the beautiful Karina in a secluded place and attacked her, giving in to base motives. At a loss, the investigation sought the public's help by offering a $10,000 reward for information that could lead to the perpetrator. The initiative received a widespread response. Detectives explored some 250 leads, conducted 600 genetic tests, and compiled more than 1,700 reports, all to no avail. It seemed that the perpetrator had not committed crimes before, at least not been caught for them, which further complicated the investigation. On August 31, 2016, a utility worker approached the police station with some information. At the time of Mrs. Vetrano's death, he was in a restricted area of the park and saw a man emerge from the bushes, who then ran in a northerly direction. Based on his testimony, the New York Police Department developed and distributed a sketch of the suspect in December 2016. However, it took into account that the person depicted in the sketch could have been a passerby who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Unfortunately, the release of the sketch of suspected perpetrator provided no new information, and the investigation reached another long stalemate. On December 4, 2016, the Federal Bureau of Investigation joined the investigation into the death of Karina Vetrano. Initially, they developed a psychological profile of the perpetrator. According to FBI experts, the individual was very familiar with the area, especially the park where the incident occurred, suggesting the possibility that the assailant lived or continues to live nearby. However, fearing capture, he now avoids the area. It was clear he understood that the quiet, partially overgrown territory was ideal for concealing his act. Based on this theory, the police conducted screenings among local African American men, but this did not yield the desired result. Chanel Lewis' life didn't particularly stand out from other young African American individuals. He lived in one of Brooklyn's low-income housing complexes, about 4 to 5 miles from Spring Creek Park. Unemployed, Chanel lived with his mother, 3 sisters, and their children. Perhaps the only detail that set him apart was his diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia. Nonetheless, this didn't prevent him from graduating from a private school for students with emotional and behavioral issues. Former classmates remembered Chanel as a quiet loner. The kids constantly picked on him, one of them shared. Girls even intimidated and punched him. He had no friends. Another peer mentioned that Lewis sometimes fought back, but not effectively. He was often ridiculed for his clothing and appearance. Chanel always wore a hoodie and would smirk and walk away in difficult situations, earning him the nickname African Lizard. However, a fellow student, 17-year-old Danielle Muniz, described Chanel as a smart kid with good grades. He liked to show me funny videos on the bus, she recalled. I never saw him be cruel. Some sources reported that the young man once claimed he wanted to cut all the girls, asking during his time in middle school, "What happens if I bring a knife to school?" Dr. Edward Dana, The executive director of the school to which Chanel was transferred commented on this. We received no reports of threats in middle school. During his time at our school, he had no disciplinary sanctions. I never heard him make threatening statements towards other students. Nonetheless, Chanel was a traumatized teenager who often experienced bullying. He dreamed of working in social services, wanting to help those in distress. When conflicts arose at home, he would wander the streets, frequently visiting the park. Lewis had several minor encounters with the police, 2 for violations in Spring Creek and 1 for urinating in public. In May 2016, another incident occurred when a local merchant reported Lewis for loitering in his store with a crowbar. Responding officers checked Chanel's ID and released him, as he had no prior incidents. However, this information was retained by the police and would later play a crucial role in the investigation into Karina Vetrano's death. In February 2017, Detective John Russo, who was involved in the investigation, remembered something significant. He had repeatedly seen a young man in a hoodie wandering the park. John even attempted to follow him once, intrigued by the individual's behavior. The young man walked slowly, stopping for long periods in front of houses near the park, as if scouting them for potential burglaries. However, Russo lost sight of him when he contacted his colleagues by phone. The next day, following a store owner's report, a teenager matching the description came to the police's attention. 2 months into the investigation, John Russo recalled this wanderer, thinking he might have seen or heard something relevant. Investigators zeroed in on Chanel Lewis after Detective Russo took a closer look at the young man's file. Chanel's peculiarities raised interest. The police began to inquire about him among acquaintances and teachers, and information surfaced that he had allegedly expressed a desire to harm girls. This news stirred concern and suspicion. With no other leads, officers decided to focus on Lewis. It was later discovered that during the time of Karina's death, Chanel was not at home. After an argument with his family, he had gone to the park. Upon his return, his appearance was disheveled, with torn clothing and visible bruises and abrasions. His mother inquired about what had happened, and Lewis claimed he had been attacked. His account matched the timeline with a witness's description of a man fleeing the park. Additionally, on August 3, 2016, Lewis's father, a former school principal, took him to the hospital for treatment of severe wounds, most of which were cuts, and he also had an injured hand. The investigators reviewed the medical records from that day and found the story plausible. However, they saw it differently, noting similarities between the events involving Chanel Lewis and Karina Vetrano. On February 4, 2017, Chanel was brought to the police station and voluntarily provided his DNA for analysis. Would a perpetrator willingly do this? Detectives wondered. The interrogation began on the morning of February 5th. Lewis admitted that he was indeed in the park around 5 p.m. on August 2, 2016, but clarified he was walking on dirt paths, not through the thickets, and listening to music. He confessed to encountering a young woman jogging with her phone in her hand. When asked by detectives if something happened when he encountered her, Chanel nodded and quietly said, "Yes." Everyone was stunned. His response was vague, indicating confusion. "I was angry. One thing led to another. What happened, he finally stated clearly. Investigators were skeptical of this semi-admission, fearing it might provoke doubt among jurors during a trial. They waited for Chanel to elaborate. "I was walking in the park, trying to distract myself from a family argument. Then I met a woman. She was alone. I decided to follow her. When she passed by me, I grabbed her shoulders, threw her to the ground, and hit her face about 5 times so she couldn't scream. My punches knocked out several of her teeth, injuring my hand," Chanel recalled. He also added that the struggle lasted about 5 minutes. Ms. Vetrano fiercely resisted, scratching and biting. To avoid attracting attention, Lewis dragged her from the path into tall grass, where he attempted to undress and assault her. She was shocked, but continued to resist. Chanel then forcefully strangled her until he realized she was no longer alive. When asked if he knew the victim beforehand, he replied, "I did not know her before this. It all happened by chance." The motive for the act became even more unexpected and bizarre. It turns out loud music played by a neighborhood gang member for hours on end triggered Chanel's hatred and uncontrollable aggression. These negative emotions were unleashed on the unfortunate woman. A strange reason for an act indeed. Investigators' confusion was dispelled when DNA comparison results matched perfectly. Microscopic traces found on the victim's body and phone belonged to Chanel. Consequently, the police and the prosecutor concluded the case was solved and ready for court. However, the motive still seemed implausible. It's possible Chanel had noticed Karina before, as he often frequented the park and might have seen her with her father. He liked her and decided to approach her. But after being rejected, he became angry and struck her, and the situation spiraled out of control. This scenario would have been more understandable. On November 5, 2018, the trial against Chanel Lewis began. Despite his earlier statements to the authorities, Lewis pleaded not guilty, a stance echoed by his family, denying his involvement in the crime. The prosecution charged Lewis with ending a life and sexual assault, facing him with a sentence ranging from 25 years to life imprisonment. The debate over Lewis' guilt not only unfolded in the courtroom, but also spilled over into the media. Lewis' defense team stirred the pot, pointing out alleged legal violations during his arrest. Along with various news outlets, they claimed racial bias and discrimination. However, the judge dismissed these allegations as baseless, emphasizing that the investigation complied with legal standards. The prosecution presented tangible evidence and DNA analysis findings. The defense argued that the evidence was insufficient and contaminated, given the large number of people at the crime scene, including the victim's father who discovered her body. Forensic biologist Linda Rosano stated the odds of the DNA belonging to someone other than Lewis were 1 in 6 trillion. The prosecutor also introduced Lewis' phone records, revealing his internet searches on second chances and forgiveness in Catholicism, prompting the question, what sin was Chanel hoping to atone for? The release of Lewis' confession video sparked further controversy, with his lawyers arguing he was under immense pressure, leading to a coerced confession. They suspected the police of fabricating evidence, claiming the recording began only after Lewis was pressured, and that the search of his home violated protocols. The defense suggested the investigation into Karina Vetrano's death was initially botched, with public pressure mounting for an arrest leading to Lewis becoming a scapegoat. The jury was struck by the defense's powerful arguments. After hearing both sides, they were unable to reach a conclusive verdict. On November 21, 2018, the judge declared a mistrial, with a retrial initially scheduled for January 22, 2019, but later postponed to March 2019. After 5 hours of deliberation, Chanel Lewis was ultimately found guilty of Karina Vetrano's death and sentenced to life without parole on July 23, 2019. The defense's delay tactics included citing an anonymous source to allege misconduct by a juror, suggesting jury pressure and a conspiracy, with some calling the trial a lynch mob. The case, seemingly straightforward at first, ignited widespread prejudices and fears in society. Karina Vetrano's death touched many, serving as a grim reminder for women to be cautious. Did justice prevail? In any case, a young woman's life was cut short, and Chanel Lewis was sentenced to life imprisonment. Both families lost their children. The hope remains that the truth was indeed uncovered. Otherwise, an innocent man is behind bars while the perpetrator remains free. Story 3. On July 3, 1989, another child was born in the municipality of Estreito in the state of Maranhão in Brazil. The boy was named by a common Portuguese name, Danilo. This child was not spoon-fed or stroked on the head with bedtime stories. He was not taken by the hand to school at school age. He grew up on the streets like all the children in this poor neighborhood. The environment for adults and children in Brazil's favelas is one of oppressive poverty, low living standards, and unemployment. All of these factors are the basis for street crime to thrive. When from childhood there is only dirt, poverty, lack of human conditions, and normal food, all existing instincts of self-preservation are activated. Everyone survives as they can or as they want. And unfortunately, more often than not, A person who from childhood has seen only violence and the speed of the result obtained by force will choose the same road of life, because otherwise he does not know how. Our story today is about the horrific brutality and unwavering obsession that dooms people. In 2019, Sarah Brandao was excited to welcome her younger sister Deborah and two nephews, a boy named Ian and a girl named Yasmin, to the airport. After a failed relationship with the children's father, Deborah, 30, driven by a genuine desire and drive to provide a better life for her children, moved from Brazil to Pennsylvania to live with her sister. The family quickly settled into their new place, accustomed to the cozy home and new standard of living. Deborah Brandao and her sister Sarah were inseparable. Not only did they work together in the cleaning service, but they often talked on the phone during the day. They lived the quiet and happy life they had come to another country for. But an unexpected acquaintance changed the fates of all the heroes forever. In 2020, spending a day off with children in the park, Deborah met her compatriot, 31-year-old Danilo Cavalcante. A trusting relationship quickly developed between the young people. The man was very attentive to her and kind to her children. Deborah fell in love with her Brazilian neighbor, Danilo Cavalcante, and decided that she had met a suitable and trustworthy man. After a few months of their relationship, they rented a small house and began living as a full-fledged family. After a while, the hot and emotional Danilo began to get bored with the perfect family life. The closer their relationship with Deborah became, the more jealous and obsessive he became. Mistrust arising from nothing gradually turned into total control. Between the couple constantly began to erupt scandals, which ended in violence. Danilo got drunk every night and came home a completely different person. He was like an angry animal. From Deborah, he demanded complete submission and obedience. And in case of resistance, he punished her severely in front of the children. The woman was not weak. She defended herself as best she could and would not let her beloved children be harmed. Unwilling to tolerate such treatment, she returned to her sister's home. And after repeated threats, she went to the police and then to court to obtain an order of protection prohibiting Cavalcante from approaching her. Despite Deborah's numerous attempts to distance herself from Cavalcante, he pursued her fiercely, resorting to threats of violence if she dared to permanently sever the relationship. Fearing for her life, Deborah conducts a small investigation in search of answers about Danilo Cavalcante's identity. After contacting acquaintances in Brazil through social media, she finds information about Danilo's former life and the reasons for his entry into the United States. The woman realizes that her lover is not who he claims to be, and the received information throws her into shock. It turned out that on November 5, 2017, while in his native Brazil, Danilo Cavalcante fatally wounded 20-year-old student Walter Jr. Moreira dos Reis, shooting him 5 times near a restaurant in the city of Figueirópolis. An investigation revealed that the two were friends and the killing was over Walter's car repair debt. A week after the crime, the Brazilian judicial system granted the prosecutor's office's request for preventive detention, issuing an arrest warrant. But Brazilian authorities did not have time to detain Danilo. Cavalcante was able to leave the country through Brasilia International Airport because of a disagreement by the Tocantins judicial system, which did not request that the decision be registered in the National Warrant Registry until 7 months after the crime. Cavalcante entered Puerto Rico illegally. A warrant for his arrest was issued in Brazil in June 2018. After entering Puerto Rico, Cavalcante obtained a fake ID and eventually settled in Chester County, Pennsylvania, where his sister lived. After Danilo's true identity was revealed, Deborah gave him an ultimatum to either leave her alone or she would publicize his identity. This was the woman's fatal mistake. On the evening of April 18, 2021, Deborah was walking with her children in front of her house. The children were playing catch-up and the woman was chatting quietly with an elderly neighbor. Danilo Cavalcante pulled her aside to talk. The neighbor remained waiting for Deborah and only watched the former lovers chatting. The conversation was calm, but at one point, Cavalcante pulled out 2 knives and suddenly attacked her. Deborah fell down and he stabbed her several times. Deborah's children screamed all along the street for him not to touch their mom, but the man was in agony. He stabbed Deborah a total of 38 times. A neighbor who observed the brutal scene desperately tried to administer emergency aid and stop the bleeding. Deborah's daughter ran to the neighbor's house to ask for help and call emergency services. Deborah Brandow was taken to Pauley Hospital, but eventually died from her injuries. Meanwhile, Danilo Cavalcante fled Pennsylvania to avoid arrest and was on the run for several hours until he was found and arrested by Virginia State Police. He was extradited to Pennsylvania, where he was placed under arrest pending trial. On August 16, 2023, in Chester County, Danilo Cavalcante's trial for first-degree murder began. The investigation revealed that Cavalcante refused to accept the end of their relationship and had intimidated Deborah since 2020 with regular domestic violence. During Cavalcante's trial, Deborah's crying child testified, recalling over and over again the horrifying events of that bloody day. It took the jury only 15 minutes to reach a guilty verdict. Cavalcante was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After the verdict was announced, Cavalcante was sent to the Chester County Jail in Pocopson, where he was awaiting transfer to a federal prison. But on August 31, 2023, at about 9 a.m., he escaped from the Chester County Jail using a chimney. Like a Spider-Man, he went up across the wall between two cramped hallways and so ascended through the chimney to the roof, deftly bypassed the barbed wire fences and escaped. Surveillance footage showed the prisoner in the narrow space between two walls in the exercise yard. He put his arms and legs on either side and walked upwards. He then ran across the roof, climbed over the fence, and pushed through the barbed wire to freedom. Prison officials were very aware of all the vulnerabilities that had been identified in the prison after Igor Bolta's escape and believed that they had been addressed. Officials believed that the barbed wire added after a similar escape by an inmate named Igor Bolta a few months earlier would prevent a jailbreak, said Acting Warden Howard Holland. According to court documents, in May, an inmate named Igor Bolta climbed onto the roof of the jail and jumped to a less secure location. He was captured less than a mile from the prison about 5 minutes after escaping. Again, the one thing we didn't take into account was the failure on the human factors side. We only focused on the physical infrastructure, not the human factor, Howard Holland said shortly after Cavalcante disappeared. Whoever was supposed to be monitoring the prison's 160 cells did not see the escape unfold, Holland said. A guard in a tower that overlooked the prisoners did not see Cavalcante slip away. The tower guard was first placed on administrative leave and then fired. As a matter of urgency, the prison was closed and the search for a particularly dangerous criminal began. Alerts were everywhere. Danilo Cavalcante, age 33, black hair, possibly armed and very dangerous. The escape of a dangerous killer from state prison has gotten a lot of publicity. The search for the fugitive was broadcast daily on all media channels. The Pennsylvania State Police chief, who led the search for Cavalcante, held regular press conferences and briefings, providing accurate information to state residents about the special operation. He urged residents not to stay on the sidelines, but to take an active role, through vigilance and observation, to help determine the perpetrator's route. And it worked. So, about a few hours after the escape, Danilo Cavalcante was spotted walking along a road about 2 miles west of the prison. With the help of reports from local residents, Cavalcante was spotted using a surveillance camera in the early morning hours of September 2nd. Police set up a search perimeter around the area, securing the roads and railroads that run through it to prevent Cavalcante's potential escape, and put up a $10,000 reward for any information leading to his capture. Authorities began searching within 2 miles of the jail in the heavily wooded area of Pocopson Township and Chester County. A local resident spotted the fugitive in a creek bed just days after the escape, but he fled into the woods before police could find him. The search continued. The search perimeter expanded after he spent about a week on the run. A security camera captured Cavalcante at Longwood Gardens, a popular botanical garden nearly 3 miles from the jail, just south of where law enforcement initially searched for him. There's a lot of ravines, a lot of high fields, a lot of grass, a lot of cover for a guy 5 feet tall and 120 pounds. Robert Clark, Deputy U.S. Marshal for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, said September 5th. In addition to the difficult, rugged terrain, searchers had a hard time coping with the extreme heat and humidity that stood for days. After a week of desperate searches for the fugitive felon, the number of officers involved in the search for Cavalcante on the ground has grown from 250 to nearly 400. We have a large perimeter secured. We're very optimistic, the police chief said. The search team has been strengthened not only in numbers, but also in the equipment attached to the search. Helicopters flying over the search area began playing a recorded message from Cavalcante's Portuguese-speaking mother begging Cavalcante to surrender peacefully to authorities. The next morning, Cavalcante was spotted by a security camera on a property located about 2 miles south of the prison. Police moved in, set up a new perimeter around the facility and Longwood Gardens, as well as schools in close proximity to the search area, will be closed while the search is conducted. Police continued an intensive search for the object for the rest of the week, and Longwood Gardens briefly reopened to limited access until forced to evacuate and close again after another sighting of the object on September 7th. That same day, police increased the reward for information leading to his capture from $10,000 to $20,000. After nearly a week of searching, nerves were on edge. Locals knew a man convicted of murder was on the loose, but authorities still hadn't told them how Cavalcante escaped from prison. Philadelphia residents in Chester County were asked by police to lock all doors and windows, secure vehicles, and stay indoors. CBS News reported 34-year-old Danilo Cavalcante escaped from a Pennsylvania prison. The intense search continued until a major event on September 9th, when Cavalcante apparently broke through the search perimeter in Longwood Gardens when he was spotted on a video intercom call standing on the front porch of a former colleague's home near Phoenixville, nearly 20 miles northeast of the search perimeter. Cavalcante had a deft way of changing his appearance. He was shaved and dressed in new clothes. Danilo moved around the state with sophistication and managed to go undetected. So he stole a van from a local dairy store and drove it to Phoenixville, hoping to get help and shelter from acquaintances. On the morning of September 10th, a stolen van with an empty gas tank was found abandoned in a field in suburban East Nantmeal. The search area moved to the northern part of Chester County. The fugitives' movements again changed the search perimeter. On September 11th, as the search continued, Cavalcante was added to the Interpol list, and authorities increased the reward for information on his whereabouts. That same night, emergency services received a call from a local resident. He reported that a man similar in description had broken into the garage of his home. The homeowner was forced to open fire in self-defense and shot him 7 times. But Cavalcante was able to escape the home and steal a .22 caliber rifle with a scope and flashlight from the home. Police immediately arrived on the scene and found Cavalcante's sweatshirt and shoes in close proximity to the home. Once the identity of the perpetrator was confirmed, and it was determined that the dangerous felon was now armed, police urged residents in the South Coventry neighborhood to lock all doors, windows, and vehicles, and stay indoors if possible. The convicted felon is armed with a handgun and is particularly dangerous. Cavalcante's escape has alarmed many area residents. School districts canceled classes for the day after Cavalcante was spotted on surveillance video. Police expanded the search and urged residents to keep their doors locked. Police set up a new search perimeter in South Coventry Township that was tighter than previous ones, because they were certain Cavalcante was now surrounded. The search continued throughout the day on September 12th. Around 1 a.m. on September 13th, an aircraft with thermal imaging technology spotted Cavalcante in the woods. Despite the sighting, police had to wait until sunrise to approach due to inclement weather that prevented the surveillance plane from operating safely. The big breakthrough came in the early morning hours of September 13th, when authorities learned that a security alarm went off shortly after midnight within the final search perimeter. According to Bivens, an Office of Illicit Drug Enforcement aircraft using thermal imaging technology detected a heat signal in the area around 1 a.m. The alarm was triggered. Technology really played a major role in this, said Ron Johnson, a retired Missouri State Highway Patrol captain. Things went against law enforcement for a long time, but they paused in time and were able to pick up the heat signature from a DEA spy plane. Around 8 a.m. on September 13th, police found Cavalcante asleep with the rifle he had stolen from his home 2 nights earlier. Danilo Cavalcante, a dangerous criminal, attempted to escape by crawling into thick undergrowth, but a police dog named Yoda subdued him by biting his head and holding him until police arrived. Lieutenant Colonel George Bivens said at a news conference that Yoda caused Cavalcante minor head injuries during his capture. They were able to land very quietly, Bivens said. We had the element of surprise, and that allowed us to capture the fugitive without casualties. Cavalcante was questioned by police immediately after his capture, where he said he survived on watermelons and creek water, traveled only at night, and even once almost got caught by a police officer while hiding. Cavalcante planned to steal a car and travel to Canada. Since returning to prison, Cavalcante has been charged with multiple crimes related to his escape, including burglary, trespassing, and theft. Following the capture of high-risk felon Danilo Cavalcante, local and state officials, including Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, expressed gratitude to the law enforcement officers who assisted in the search. Chester County District Attorney Deb Ryan stated, "Today is a great day here in Chester County. Our nightmare is finally over and the good guys won. We are indebted to all first responders for their tireless and dedicated efforts to bring this fugitive to justice. They worked around the clock and we are deeply grateful to them all." Chief George Bivens, who led the search, discussed the various challenges law enforcement officers had to overcome to find Cavalcante, noting the intense heat and thunderstorms that occurred in the area during the search, as well as the fact that each of the search perimeters established during the search were in heavily wooded areas. The search team consisted of approximately 500 law enforcement officers, including Pennsylvania State Police, FBI, ATF, and U.S. Marshals, who searched the area around the shooting scene. Police established a perimeter of several miles in each direction. Following Cavalcante's escape, the Chester County Jail Board, which oversees the Chester County Jail, was heavily criticized by residents in the area for failing to prevent Cavalcante's escape. Residents noted that the jail had the opportunity to make appropriate security improvements following Igor Bolta's May 19th escape attempt, and that those improvements could have potentially prevented Cavalcante's escape because he used the same method Bolta used to escape. The prison has already fired the prison guard who was on duty during Cavalcante's September 7th escape, with prison officials claiming that the guard had the opportunity to spot Cavalcante during the escape. Days after the offender's capture, the Chester County Jail announced that they had installed a tin roof over the area where Cavalcante climbed up 2 walls to access the roof and escape, along with various other security measures and improvements. I think there are obviously questions that Chester County officials are going to have to answer as to how the suspect was able to escape, especially given the history of this prison, said Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro. The communication, cooperation of all law enforcement agencies and local residents who came together during what has been such a long search for the state helped to catch and honorably punish the evil. Danilo will now never go free. Story 4. This story serves as a poignant reminder of life's fragility and the devastating impact of senseless actions. Let this tragedy be a call to compassion and guide collective efforts to prevent such sorrow from befalling other families. Emily Longley was born on February 22, 1994, in a London hospital. She was the first child in the young family of Mark and Caroline Longley. Mark's friends teased him about becoming a father soon. At 26, he felt utterly unprepared for parenthood. He was present at the birth, and when the nurse cleaned the newborn and handed her to him, he tenderly held her in his arms, her tiny head resting in his palms, her legs barely reaching his elbow. The girl opened her eyes and gazed at her dad. In that moment, Mark knew fatherhood wouldn't be a problem for him. A few years later, the Longley family welcomed a second daughter, Hannah. The 2 blonde sisters adored each other and were a joy for their father. He was confident that keeping the children warm and safe would let them know how much he loved them. The girls grew up surrounded by their parents' unconditional love. They had an example of prosperity and happiness right before their eyes. Mark Longley worked as a journalist for a local newspaper, while Caroline was a teacher. The girls had a promising future ahead, the kind every parent wishes for their children. 10 years later, Emily and Hannah Longley's world was turned upside down when their parents made the momentous decision to move from their hometown of Bournemouth to the scenic landscapes of New Zealand. This was a massive change for everyone, as relocating to another country was a significant step. This challenging decision was made for Emily's health, following doctors' advice that she needed a change in climate. The Longley family traveled halfway around the world, hoping for a better life for their daughters. And so it was. New Zealand's climate is varied due to its landscape. Most regions of New Zealand have a temperate maritime climate, characterized by 4 distinct seasons. Winters here are relatively mild, and summers are comparatively cool. The Pacific Ocean and mountain ranges are major contributing factors. The nature and air were perfect for the family from England. A new chapter began in the lives of the Longleys and their daughters. Emily attended a prestigious private school, and for a while, life went on quietly until she was metaphorically stabbed in the back by former classmates. Her friend, Sarah Lee Terblanche, caused a stir at school by revealing that Emily had fallen the wrong crowd and was associated with banned substances. Sarah gave an interview to the school newspaper, detailing a party at Emily's house. After overcoming initial disappointments and betrayals, at the end of 2010, Emily decided to return to England to continue her education. She moved in with her grandparents, Ronald and Zosie Longley, in a large, detached cottage near the promenade in Southbourne, close to Bournemouth, and enrolled in a British college, hoping it would be a fresh start for her life. The decision bore fruit. Emily, who had struggled in school, transitioned to a calmer student life and thrived. Emily made strides, allowing her to balance her studies at Brockenhurst College in Hampshire with a job at the Topshop clothing store. At 16, Emily Longley was a vibrant, cheerful, and highly ambitious young woman with striking blonde beauty. Her radiant appearance quickly led to early successes in the modeling industry, while her captivating charm and irresistible charisma made her stand out in her community. In December 2010, at a party, Emily met 19-year-old Elliot Vince Turner. Elliot was the only son of a wealthy and successful jeweler, Lee Turner. He worked at his father's jeweller's store in Bournemouth and lived in his family's home in Queen's Park, an affluent area of Bournemouth. He was part of a group known as The Firm, made up of affluent young men, actively socializing in local bars and clubs in Bournemouth and Poole. Elliot Turner, who drew the attention of many women, seemed almost obsessed with them. Nonetheless, the two quickly became a couple. Elliot was incredibly devoted to his girlfriend, who had started modeling and earning her first income. She began to attract the attention of many men. Elliot's jealousy towards Emily was intense. Within 4 months, their relationship had turned into a battleground of constant arguments and mutual grievances. Amidst this tumultuous relationship, marked by Elliot's worrying behavior and endless jealousy, emotional abuse became the norm. If he disapproved of her attire, he'd accuse her of dressing like a call girl. He hacked into her Facebook account to monitor her activities and conversations. He also showed up unannounced when she wasn't around. He used his strength and anger to intimidate Emily. Once, she wrote him a note saying, "Stop being so aggressive." However, each incident was followed by remorse and apologies, only for the cycle to repeat. Elliot eventually crossed the line from verbal threats to physical actions. He grabbed her by the throat and punched her in public on multiple occasions. He then justified his actions by blaming Emily for his uncontrollable outbursts of emotion. After continuous arguments and fights, Emily began to fear for her life. She took a break and went on a holiday to her parents in New Zealand. This was the Longley family's best Easter holiday ever. Parents Hannah and Emily hung out just like old times. They walked a lot, laughed, and spent a great deal of time together, as if sensing an imminent farewell. When saying goodbye, her father hugged her tightly. She promised to return in September for the Rugby World Cup. Already on the aeroplane, she wrote her father a message. "It was so good to see you. I love you." They had shared a special bond between father and daughter since her birth. That was the last time the family saw Emily alive. She returned to the UK intending to end her relationship with Elliot. This happened, but tragically, at the cost of a promising young woman's life. Elliot met his girlfriend not with flowers, but with a new batch of accusations and quarrels. Before Emily returned from New Zealand, Elliot discovered pictures of Emily with 2 shirtless young men on social media. Furious with jealousy, He invited her to spend the night at his house. Despite the disagreement, Emily agreed to return to Elliot's family home to discuss their problems, comforted by the presence of Lee and Anita, Elliot's parents. Upon her arrival at the house, a barrage of jealousy and insults descended upon her. The young couple did a lot of yelling and arguing. Half an hour of yelling was followed by silence. On the morning of May 7, 2011, emergency services received a call that 17-year-old Emily Longley was found unconscious in bed. Anita Turner called after discovering the girl in her son's room. Rescuers who arrived on the scene were only able to state her death. Neighbors saw Turner sitting in the ambulance with his head in his hands after the girl's death. Elliot Turner was arrested immediately after Emily's death, but was later released on bail pending an investigation. The investigation began after the tragic incident. Turner Jr., haunted by guilt, wrote a confession. His parents, determined not to lose their only son, deliberately withheld crucial evidence, thus delaying the investigation. 51-year-old Anita Turner and 53-year-old Lee Turner removed a coat their son wore on the night of the incident from their house, retrieved the confession letter from its pocket, and doused it with bleach to destroy vital evidence. During the investigation, a decision was made to secretly plant listening devices in the expansive Turner family home. From May 18th to June 14th, police made a series of recordings inside the Turner residence. After obtaining evidence of a family discussion about fabricating evidence and concerns about lying to the police seized the household computers to search for further evidence. And they found it. A review of the browser's search history revealed searches for death by strangulation and how to avoid a murder charge. In July, all 3 family members were arrested and charged with involvement in the incident and intentionally concealing evidence. Elliot Turner denied his involvement, blaming Emily for his troubles. During a forensic reconstruction of the incident, it was determined that a struggle had ensued between Elliot and Emily on that fateful day. Elliot used force in an attempt to subdue her, pressing her face down into the bed with a pillow. He then discarded the pillow and continued to strangle her with his hands. When she fell silent, he coldly stood up and left the room. Pathologists examining Emily's body found injuries consistent with strangulation. Elliot had scratches on his arm and Emily's fingertips bore his DNA, indicating a struggle between them. The trial revealed that Elliot's behavior towards Emily was characterized by threats, aggression, violence, control, and possessiveness. These alarming traits escalated, and on a fateful night in May 2011, a heated argument erupted between the couple over Emily's choice of outfit and her photos with unknown men. The wealthy family couldn't afford to lose their son and tarnish their reputation. Hired lawyers fervently defended Elliot. The defense attempted to downplay the tormentor's role in the young woman's demise, suggesting she might have used drugs. However, the Dorset police appointed an independent toxicological examination, which found no drugs or other banned substances in the victim's bloodstream. The affluent jeweler and his wife, who disposed of evidence to help cover up how their jealous son ended the life of the aspiring New Zealand model Emily Longley. At 20 years old, Elliot Turner was found guilty by a jury at Winchester Crown Court in May of ending 17-year-old Emily's life in his bed after a bout of jealous rage. In sentencing, Judge Dobbs stated that he intimidated, stalked, threatened, and assaulted Emily to control her as his trophy girlfriend. The judge also advised Elliot to abandon thoughts of champagne, Bentleys, and girls as he sentenced him to life imprisonment, stating he must serve at least 16 years before being eligible for parole. His parents, Lee, 54, and Anita, 51, were also sentenced at the same court after being found guilty of obstructing justice by concealing evidence. They concealed the crime by destroying their son's confession letter and removing crucial evidence following the incident in their Bournemouth home. Their son was also sentenced to 9 months in prison for obstructing justice by hiding evidence. The prosecution argued that Turner used a pillow to suffocate Emily and then strangled her after she returned to his home to discuss their situation following a fierce argument that night. Emily's father, Mark Longley, branded Elliot Turner evil and expressed his hope that Turner would suffer every day in prison. Elliot Turner was found guilty of ending her life in May 2012 and was sentenced to life imprisonment. His parents, Anita Turner and Lee Turner, were also imprisoned. They received 27 months for misleading the police about the incident and destroying a confession note written by their son. As it was a homicide investigation, the police retained her body, and it was not until September that she could be brought home, but in a closed casket. The Turner couple was released in 2013. That same year, Turner's appeal for a reduced sentence was denied. However, at hearings in the High Court of London, British judges ruled otherwise. It's clear that over some time, due to wounded pride, he harbored thoughts of ending her life, culminating in her demise, Lord Chief Justice Royce Justice Globe stated in his verdict. Simon Jones, one of the successful prosecutors, stated after the sentence that Emily's death was a case of domestic violence. Upon hearing his sentence, Elliot said, "I never wanted to hurt her. I was just defending myself." Emily Longley's perpetrator, Elliot Turner, is currently serving a life sentence in a Kent prison for the brutal ending of the young aspiring model's life. The court ruled that he would not be eligible for parole for at least 16 years. Despite being incarcerated, the Daily Star reports that Turner has decorated the walls of his prison cell with photos of Emily, indicating a disturbing and potentially obsessive connection with his victim. Remarkably, while behind bars, Turner has reportedly spoken about his anticipation of the day he will be released, expressing a desire to return to a life of champagne, Bentleys, and birds. Such an attitude raises concerns about his lack of remorse and the potential for continuing harmful behavior after release. Furthermore, the involvement of Elliot's parents, Lee and Anita Turner, in perverting justice by destroying their son's confession letter and tampering with evidence from the crime scene led to their own imprisonment. This underscores the gravity of the case and the collective impact of the Turner family's actions on the pursuit of justice for Emily Longley. After the dust of the trial settled, Emily's father began to delve into domestic violence. Through patterns and behaviors, he painted a portrait of Elliot as an abuser. He constantly thought about ending her life. It was only a matter of time. To love someone is not to try to control their life, not to call someone derogatory names, and not to isolate them from their friends. That's not love. A woman is treated like a trophy. Such relationships are solely about the man. From Emily's father's memories, he was cruel to Emily before she returned to New Zealand. But she didn't tell us anything. I don't know why, but now things could have been different if she had. Now I don't think about Turner or his family. He's in prison, and I hope he suffers every day. If I dwell too much on what he did, the anger rises, and it's the kind of anger that can consume you. He never considered the people who for 17 years loved, cherished, and raised Emily. He stood behind her, wrapped his arms around her neck, and ended her life. Even now, years later, it's still hard to believe someone could do this to Emily. After enduring the tragedy, Emily's parents divorced. But to this day, all anniversaries and birthdays are very hard for them. Easter is especially difficult because it was the last time the family spent together. On May 6, 2011, Emily was still alive. She was chatting on Facebook with her father just a few hours before it happened. She seemed normal, happy, without the slightest hint of fear. On May 7th, everything changed. A phone call woke Emily's father. He didn't answer right away. By the time he fully woke up, he had several missed calls from his ex-wife, Caroline, and multiple messages from her on his cell phone. Texts from her weren't unusual, but the volume of calls and messages was alarming. Finally, he answered an incoming call. It was his younger daughter, Hannah, crying inconsolably on the other end. In the background, he heard his ex-wife screaming, "Emily is gone. Emily is gone." He sat on the same couch Emily had sat on just a week ago and broke down. What was she planning to do after college? This couldn't be true. How could the girl who was so full of life now be gone? He couldn't remember anything more about that night. Emily's father didn't sleep until he boarded the plane to England. From Emily's father's recollections, I remember being driven to Auckland, stopping in a small town to refuel and seeing Emily's photo on the front page of the Herald. I thought I was going to be sick right there in the station, reading the headline. At the airport, people were throwing their copies in the trash, and I wanted to tell them who she was, that they should keep that newspaper. It seemed like an eternity before Mark Longley arrived in England. He was still in shock and couldn't believe the reason for his visit to his once-beloved England was to identify his beloved daughter, Emily. He still hoped there had been some mistake. They took him straight to the morgue where Emily's body was. He stood in a room with Caroline, a police officer and the mortician, who pointed to a window and said the body was in the next room. The mortician pointed to the window, the light would turn on, and when they were ready, they could enter the room. The light came on. Mark and Caroline, with hands cold from horror, stood unable to cross the threshold of that room. They were ready to scream that it wasn't their daughter, but it was her, their Emily. She was lying on the gurney, covered with a purple sheet, looking as if she were sleeping. Her father approached and touched her face. It had a beautiful alabaster hue, and her skin was smooth but icy cold. From Emily's father's memories, I wanted to run away and pretend I hadn't seen it, but I stood there holding her hand, looking at the face I had gazed at so intently when she was born. Except now, her eyes were closed, and I realized this wasn't a joke. She wasn't going to sit up and say boo. Emily, my daughter, was gone. In moments of such horror, all tomorrows become yesterdays. It's when a flood of emotions crashes down, bombarding and overwhelming the soul, that you realize your utter helplessness. That day in the morgue was the last time her parents saw their Emily. The pain of losing someone doesn't get easier, time doesn't heal, it merely teaches you to live with it. Everyone always commented and still speaks of how beautiful Emily was. She had a wonderful, warm, and loving side to her nature. She would come up to you, wrap you in her long arms, and hug you tightly. But most of all, her family misses the woman Emily could have become. They will never get to see how her life would have unfolded, a life that was denied to her. Now, years later, Emily's father has remarried. He has a wonderful wife, Hillary, and a beautiful son, Hunter, is growing up in their family. Emily's younger sister, Hannah, has graduated from university, set up her own life, one where domestic violence has no place. Their greatest regret is that their Emily is not here to share the joyful moments with them. Story 5. Mom is a special person in the life of each of us. In all languages, this word sounds affectionate and tender because it carries only goodness and understanding. Mommy is the only word a person shouts in moments of pain, fear, or joy. But unfortunately, children are not always the most important thing in a mother's life. A high-profile crime that took place in 2016 in one of the largest states in the United States, Texas, has progressed throughout the country. A young and successful 42-year-old woman, Christy Sheets, shot and killed her 2 adult daughters in the backyard of her home. But why? Let's start at the beginning and try to figure out what led a loving mother to such a cruel act. Christy Bird was born in the city of Decatur, Alabama in 1974 in the family of Rebecca Bird. The girl's parents separated when she was very young. Mom Christy had to work hard to provide a poverty-free existence for her child. The main role in the upbringing of Christy took her grandfather. The girl adored her grandfather because he pampered her and taught her unusual things, such as how to hold a gun. The retired officer had an impressive collection of weapons. The two of them would lock themselves in a semi-basement dark room where they would spend hours looking at the treasures under her grandfather's fascinating stories. From early childhood, a person tries to find out his place in life, learns to build relationships with others, receives education for further application of the knowledge gained in real life. But Christy did not strive for knowledge. Although she studied in one of the best schools in the state, the study was not interested in the young rebel. Constant clashes with peers severely traumatized her childhood psyche. As a result of regular attacks and difficulties with classmates, Christy barely finishes school. After school, Christy moves to the northern part of Alabama in Lawrence County to attend university. Here, she takes a job as a secretary at a transportation company where she meets Jason Sheets, a young and promising specialist. The young people spend hours walking around the city. They hike together. They go on vacation to Christy's hometown. A strong and long-lasting relationship develops between them. After a few years, They get married and move to Kathy's town. On one of the quietest streets of the city, the young family buys a house. On April 19, 1994, their first daughter, Taylor, was born. Jason was happy because he had always dreamed of a little daughter. The Sheets family was quite well-to-do and happy. Jason worked successfully in a large oil and gas company as an IT consultant. Christy raised her daughter and was an exemplary housewife. On October 21, 1998, Christy and Jason had a second daughter who was named Madison. Family life went on in a calm and measured way. Jason was working. Christy was taking care of the children. Until tragedy struck, which once and for all changed the former way of life of the family. In 2012, Christy's grandfather died. She loved him like the father she never had. The woman had a very hard time experiencing such a great loss. The family idol was replaced by psychologists and antidepressants. But just 2 months later, still not recovered from the loss of her grandfather, Christy's mother dies. Another tragedy morally kills the woman and she gets into a clinic with a mental disorder for the first time. One clinic is replaced by another. Antidepressants are replaced by hard alcohol. Christy's internal state remains very unstable and vulnerable for a long time. Husband and daughters for a long time in every possible way try to support a dear and beloved person. After a while, they seem to succeed. Christy returns to her old life. She gets a job as a manager in a laser cosmetology clinic where they specialize in the removal of tattoos. Work takes up all her time, while her beloved husband and daughters try to occupy her heart and thoughts. On September 25, 2015, the day of her daughters, Christy posts a picture of Taylor and Madison on her Facebook page. She captions it with a declaration of motherly love. Christy called her children amazing, sweet, kind, beautiful and smart girls. You have no idea how much I love and cherish you, Christy wrote at the time, addressing her daughters. In January of that year, she published another strong post, already in defense of her right to bear arms. A post whose photo showed a polished gun on a table and 7 bullets next to it. I have 10 guns. Obama wants 8 of my guns. How many guns do I have? Responding to the comments, she writes, "That's right, I have 10 guns." Christy Sheets has been a vocal supporter of legislation to make firearms widely available to the public. In particular, she was against the Democratic Party's initiative to ban the free trade of semi-automatic handguns. Christy claimed it would violate her family's right to defend themselves. How ironic that in the end, Christy Sheets' love and admiration for and staunch defense of guns and her belief in the right to bear arms led to the tragic loss of her 2 daughters and her own life. On June 24, 2016, Jason's birthday, Christy called her daughters over for a family dinner. That night, the entire family gathered in the living room. But instead of a celebratory dinner, Jason wanted to inform his daughters of his impending divorce. Christy overheard their conversation. An uproar broke out in the living room. She was yelling. She cursed. Then she left. Jason tried to calm the girls down, promised things would get better. But Christy came back with a gun in her hand. Jason covered the children, screaming, and panic took over the house. Madison hid behind the couch and discreetly called emergency services. When the dispatcher answered, the girl was overtaken by her mother. "Mommy, Mommy, don't shoot. Don't shoot." Wheezing, moaning, silence. A voice was heard again. "Don't shoot. There are children. I'll do what you want. Don't shoot." The call was interrupted. In the second call, made by 22-year-old Taylor, she is unable to speak or relay information to the dispatcher. She was completely stumped by the incredible chaos that was unfolding in the family home. Taylor was shot twice by her mother, who fired the fatal shot as her daughter was dying on the ground outside the family home. Holding a gun, Christy simply fired it several times at Taylor and Madison. At 5 p.m., police arrived at the scene of the tragedy after several 911 calls. Near Christy and Jason's home, police officers saw the bodies of 17-year-old Madison Sheets and 22-year-old Taylor Sheets on the ground. Christy was standing over Madison's body with a gun in her hand. She was clearly about to fire another shot at the girl. The police officer, not knowing if the victim was alive, ordered her to drop the weapon immediately. Christie ignored this demand, at which point the officers opened fire at point-blank range. The woman was killed at the scene. An examination of the victims revealed that 17-year-old Madison died instantly from her injuries, and 22-year-old Taylor was wounded. She was flown by helicopter to the hospital, but unfortunately, her life could not be saved. So for both daughters, the injuries inflicted by their own mother proved fatal. The only survivor of the massacre was 45-year-old Jason Sheets. Christie shot him too, but he managed to take refuge in the house of neighbors, who asked him to call the police. The neighbors heard him pleading with Christie, "Don't hurt them. There are kids." But Christie didn't heed those words. Instead, she fired a couple of bullets in Jason's direction. Only a lucky break saved him from death. However, the police were not immediately able to question Jason about the reasons for the incident. When the police arrived at the scene, they immediately sent him to the hospital in a state of deep shock. The area near the house where the family tragedy played out was cordoned off. Shocked neighbors and random witnesses were repeatedly questioned. As interviews began, it was most accurately established that at first there were sounds of bickering coming from the house. Then, according to witnesses concerned about what was happening, Christie began beating the girls. Then, taking a .38 caliber shotgun, she shot Madison and then Taylor at point-blank range. The girls, bleeding, ran out of the house. Madison managed to take only a few steps before falling to the ground and collapsing in agony. Seeing this, the mother fired another shot in Taylor's direction. She fell, and Christie went inside the house and cold-bloodedly reloaded the shotgun and finished her off with a point-blank shot. Witnesses said Christie acted in cold blood and without emotion. After the first shots rang out back in the living room of the home, all family members ran outside. It was a family argument that escalated into a shooting, but we're still trying to piece everything together. That was the first version of what happened, voiced for the TV news crews that arrived at the scene of the tragedy. What drove 42-year-old Christie Bird Sheets to commit this unthinkably brutal crime? The detectives don't know the exact reasons. All they have at their disposal are dry facts. So, police say in the house of the family Sheets not all was not well over several years because of conflicts between family members to Sheets more than a dozen times called the police patrol. In the end, Christie's husband and father of both girls, 45-year-old Jason Sheets, could not stand it and left his wife, but he did return to her recently. On the day of the tragedy, the entire family gathered for dinner at Christie's invitation. Even Taylor, a college student after a recent fight with her mother, came home to celebrate Jason's birthday with her family. Shocked observers and acquaintances of the family were shocked by what happened. How and why did a mother kill her own daughters? Neighbor Gino Hernandez recalls the Sheets family. "I knew both girls since they were 10 years old," the man said, wiping away tears. "They were always nice, outgoing girls, always waved and said hello when they walked by. The other thing is Christie. She wouldn't even stop by the barbecue. It was always like she was on her own. Wonderful girls, and Jason's a good guy too," another neighbor asserted. Their problems were all about Christie. The investigation also agrees with the neighbors. It has already been revealed that Christie had conflicts with both daughters before. Also, official authorities have already reported that Christie suffered from mental illness. On June 29, 2016, at the first press conference, Sheriff Troy Niels told reporters that the 42-year-old mother was depressed and had made repeated attempts to take her own life because she was on the verge of divorcing her husband. According to the police spokesman, the couple's marriage began to crumble back in 2012. Just then, the grandfather who raised Christie Sheets died. To kill family members, Mrs. Sheets used a gun, which she inherited from a deceased relative. Also, one of the possible reasons for the serious discord in the family, the sheriff called Christie's unwillingness to put up with the upcoming marriage of her eldest daughter Taylor. A few days before the shots were fired, Christie Sheets had an argument with her oldest daughter where she attempted to apply house arrest to Taylor and forbid her from seeing her fiancé. Jason did not agree with his wife that house arrest was an appropriate punishment for a 22-year-old girl, noted Niels. Juan Sebastian Logo, 23, and Taylor Sheets, 22, were in the same year of college in the art department. The young people had been dating for 4 years. On social media, they showed how in love they were and how they were preparing for their upcoming wedding. A small wedding ceremony was planned for June 27th. It has been suggested that the mother may have objected to the marriage of Taylor and Sebastian, who was of Hispanic descent. Disagreeing with his wife, Jason Sheets insisted that incarcerating their eldest daughter was inappropriate punishment for an adult. Later, Jason Sheets would still testify, telling investigators that his wife had called their daughters to inform them of the divorce. She had been notified of it, but instead of explaining in front of the children, she pointed a gun at them and shot them several times. But she did not shoot her husband. As Mr. Sheets stated, the wife's motive was that she wanted to make him suffer. According to Jason Sheets, his wife's downward spiral began in 2012 after she lost her grandfather and then lost her mother just 2 months later. Apparently, the gun she used to kill her daughters was a gift from her grandfather. Jason Sheets revealed that his wife applied for a license to carry a gun, but was denied because of her mental illness. This begs the question, what did Christy Sheets think could have triggered the need to punish her husband and make him suffer? Was it the breakdown of their marriage? The feeling that control and valor in her life had been lost? Hinted at in a cluster of Facebook rants, where Christy talked about protecting herself and her family. Or could Christy Sheets' decision to kill her daughters have been driven in some way by medication or the continued deterioration of her mental state? Jason Sheets told police that his wife suffered from depression. She was taking prescribed pills by the handful and seeing a therapist. She had been treated 3 times in recent years after attempting to leave her life at a private psychiatric hospital, Sheriff Nels reported. Christy Sheets had ample time and opportunity to kill her husband, but she didn't. Jason realized that Christy wanted him to suffer, Sheriff Nels said, echoing Jason Sheets, recounting the details of the incident for the first time. Mr. Sheets revealed that Christy knew about how much he loved Taylor and Madison, and how much they loved him. Nels continued. Perhaps the complete rift in the family, and the realization that she was losing not only her husband, but her daughters as well, exacerbated Christy's already difficult emotional state, and she grabbed a gun, foreshadowing her tragic end as well. Madison Davey, a close family friend, gave a great interview in which he spoke about the relationships within the family. He was the best dad in the world. I used to hang out with them and he loved being around us. They were so funny together, you'd think they would fight. But no, Davey said. They loved each other very much and were always laughing. Davey went on to say that both daughters had a very close relationship with each other and with their father. Jason would do anything to protect them, and he tried to do that, but Christy was going to kill that day, Davey said. In one attempt to take her own life, Christy, perhaps only intimidating, pulled out a gun and said goodbye to her family with screams and tears. But she didn't get the desired effect. Jason replied indifferently, if you want to just shoot yourself, don't touch us, just shoot yourself. But Christy replied, no, that will be your punishment. Relatives, friends, and acquaintances were sure that something was bound to happen in this family, but no one could think that a woman would kill her daughters. Christy was bringing harm to her family. She was mentally unstable. The sheriff's department explained that police officers were repeatedly called to the home of Christy and Jason, who were having violent arguments. Since January 2012, police have received 14 calls for service. 3 of them involved Christy threatening to take her own life, having previously been diagnosed with mental health issues. One, Sebastian's inconsolable sister, Maria, stated that the Sheets sisters were some of the sweetest, most sensible and kind-hearted girls she had ever met. Today, Maria found it hard to believe that not so long ago, she and Taylor were having carefree fun at a party and looking forward to her wedding day to Sebastian. You've already become a member of our family, and that will remain the same, she addresses her friend. You were a light in this crazy world, and we will always remember you. That day of the brutal crime, where the lives of young girls with everything ahead of them were cut short, has long stirred the public. People grieved with Jason. Older sister Taylor Sheets went to school, worked as a caregiver for Care.com, and dreamed of a long, happy life with the man she loved. Younger sister Madison studied at school and at the same time worked as a nanny. On the day of the funeral of the girls mourned the whole city. Social networks and TV news channels again covered this terrible event. Is it possible that the reason for such a terrible tragedy is the availability of guns? The unwillingness of the states to finally take up and address the issue of firearms sales has once again led to another tragedy. An ordinary Texas woman, Christy Sheets, shot and killed her own 2 daughters during a domestic dispute. Such cases are not surprising for the U.S. As long as Republicans and Democrats are pulling the cat by the tail, not even trying to come to a compromise, people will die. The exact causes of the conflict that led to such tragic consequences will remain unknown. However, it is enough that the police came to this house more than once because of regular conflicts. That is, it was already clear that the family was dysfunctional, but they were still left with guns. To summarize, I would like to go back to the beginning of this story. A mother is the closest and dearest person to her children, and children are the most important thing in life for a mother. The case of Christy Sheets is an exception rather than a reality. Amidst her inner heartache, her maternal instinct seems to have completely shut down, and no one was able to stop her. But Christy's plan is fully realized. After the murder of his daughters, Jason Sheets will have to live with those horrible memories for the rest of his life. Story 6. The Amato family case, when obsession turns a quiet individual into a monster. Like many serious addictions, which can be likened to severe illnesses with psychological, biological, or social underpinnings, this case involves a destructive habit, whether it's an urge for alcohol, prohibited substances, or gambling, or an obsessive need for a particular activity or interaction with a certain person or group. It's tragic when addiction affects not just the individual, but also their loved ones who strive earnestly to help. The once prosperous and happy Amato family faced such a dilemma head-on. As all family members were healthcare professionals, they believed they could handle the situation without external help. By the time they realized the severity of the situation, it was regrettably too late. This isn't a story of mere addiction, but of a young man's extreme obsession with a woman he had never personally met. Compounded by his addiction to forbidden substances and a pathological inclination towards theft, the situation spiraled into a horrifying outcome. Let's delve into this case to understand if there was a chance to alter the course of events and prevent the tragedy. The family home bloodshed on January 25, 2019. A concerned man contacted the Seminole County Police in Florida. He reported that his close friend and colleague, Cody Amato, a nurse, unexpectedly didn't show up for his shift at the hospital, which was highly unusual for him. The day before, Cody had left work about 15 minutes early due to some urgent family issues at home. Departing so hastily, he even forgot to collect his pay for the day. Attempts to reach the 31-year-old Cody by phone were unsuccessful. He simply wasn't answering. His girlfriend, with whom he had been living recently, stated that Cody went to his parents' house the previous day at his father's request but never returned to her place, and she too couldn't reach him. All these signs triggered alarming thoughts, prompting the dispatch of police officers to the provided address. The Amato family home, located in a suburb of Orlando, boasted a large adjoining area, with a stable and a horse-walking area. Cody's car was parked in the driveway, and lights were on in several rooms of the house. At first glance, everything seemed normal, no signs of forced entry or struggle, with the doors and windows intact. When the sheriff's deputy knocked, there was no response, and calls to the landline also went unanswered. The police then sought permission to enter, and upon approval, cautiously unlocked the back door using a knife to slide the bolt. Inside, an eerie silence pervaded, though the lit room suggested someone must be present. Indeed, the homeowners were there. The officers first discovered the lifeless body of 59-year-old family patriarch, Chad Amato, lying on the kitchen floor in a pool of his own blood, with 2 close-range gunshot wounds to his chest. Next, at the staircase opposite the main entrance, lay Cody, curled up and also deceased in a massive pool of blood. Lastly, they found 61-year-old Margaret Amato sitting at her computer in the home office. At first glance, she seemed to be napping with her head resting on her arm, if not for the blood splatters on the monitor and a large spreading stain beneath her head. The murder weapon, an IWI Jericho .941 pistol found next to Cody's body, was later determined by forensic experts to have his fingerprints. With no signs of break-in or external presence and nothing missing from the house, it initially appeared that Cody, possibly after a family dispute, had ended their lives and then shot himself in the chest. However, smeared blood on the front door indicated it was locked by someone leaving the incident, suggesting the perpetrator wasn't among the deceased family members. Regarding the likely suspect, there were little doubts. Those familiar or connected with the Amato family pointed to their youngest son, 30-year-old Grant, who had been missing since that evening. His car, a white Honda, along with some personal items, including a laptop from Grant's room, were gone, implying that the owner had taken them. Grant was declared a person of interest and a search was initiated for his whereabouts. What's known about the Amato family? Margaret and Amato, née Wade, and Chad Robert Amato tied the knot in the mid-1980s. Margaret, 2 years senior to Chad, was already raising a 3-year-old son, Jason, from a previous marriage. Chad wasn't deterred by her having a child. Instead, he was ready to raise Jason as his own. In 1988, the couple welcomed their first child together, a son named Cody, followed by the birth of their youngest son, Grant Tiernan Amato, on May 20th, 1989. From childhood, the brothers shared a close bond. Raised in a well-off family, they hardly ever faced denials. However, to earn certain privileges, they had to adhere to family rules, excel in school, help with household chores, and exhibit good behavior. They strived to be the pride and support of their parents. Both parents held advanced degrees in healthcare. Margaret was a senior operational manager in a prestigious private clinic, while Chad, initially a clinical pharmacist, later shifted to software specialization. The family was quite affluent, living in a spacious suburban home with their own stable, breeding thoroughbred racehorses as a hobby. After finishing high school at 18, Jason left home, pursued university education, and started his own life. He got married, settled a family, and moved to another state, maintaining a close relationship with his parents and younger brothers. Cody and Grant were almost inseparable, attending the same school, joining the same sports team, and regularly visiting the shooting range with their father on weekends. The Amatos had an impressive firearm collection, including rare pieces, accessible only to the family patriarch for safety reasons. The youngest son, Grant, was the youngest of 3 sons in the family, and as often happens, he received the lion's share of everyone's attention and adoration. As a child, he was frail and sickly, so everyone tried to surround him with love and care. He grew up to be a modest and very shy boy, finding it hard to connect with peers, making his brothers his only friends. Grant became particularly close to Cody after their eldest brother Jason grew up and left home. After high school, the brothers pursued medical degrees together, eventually becoming anesthesiologists. While Cody excelled in his studies, becoming the top student in his class, Grant barely made it through with low grades. Nevertheless, both managed to land jobs in their field at a hospital. Cody earned a reputation as a reliable professional, but Grant frequently got into trouble, making errors and needing his work double-checked. In the summer of 2018, Grant's career at the hospital ended scandalously. He was caught stealing strictly controlled sedatives, which caused euphoria and hallucinations, and were used rarely for anesthesia. The discovery led to police involvement, and Grant was arrested. During interrogation, he admitted to the theft, claiming he administered the drugs to patients who, in his opinion, were under-medicated. Many believed Grant was using or selling the drugs illegally, though there was no direct evidence. He was immediately suspended and later fired. His criminal case for theft was eventually dismissed, reportedly due to his parents' intervention. Unemployed and internet-dependent after losing his job, the 29-year-old man, already a loner, became even more withdrawn. He spent weeks indoors, glued to his computer, mostly browsing adult websites. Grant never had a girlfriend and struggled with social interactions with women, leaving him feeling inadequate. He indulged in viewing adult content and frequently interacted with webcam models on specialized platforms, trying to fill the void of a non-existent personal life. This private interaction, of course, came at a cost. Grant easily accessed funds from his parents' and older brother's accounts for these activities. This obsession quickly spiraled into an addiction, compounded by regular alcohol consumption. But Grant seemed content with this lifestyle, living off his family, spending their money without contributing anything in return. Eventually, his father issued an ultimatum. Find a job soon, or he'd have to leave home and lose any financial support from the family. Grant promised his father to resolve the issue, but had no real intention of seeking employment. He claimed he would become a streamer, earning by broadcasting video games. His parents, seeing this as better than nothing, agreed to set up a streaming station for him. Once everything was in place, Grant pretended to be streaming, asking for privacy. But in reality, he was locked in his room, indulging in his favorite pastime, visiting adult-only websites. Trip to Japan in August 2018. When Cody took a vacation from work, he decided to embark on a journey across the globe for a change of scenery. Dreaming of visiting Japan, he invited his younger brother Grant and his best friend Jeremy. While Cody and Jeremy had their own funds for the trip, earned independently, Grant's vacation was financed by their parents. However, rather than giving the money directly to Grant, they entrusted it to Cody, the more responsible of the two. The trip lasted nearly 2 weeks, and throughout it, Grant seemed disengaged. He showed little interest in tours or landmarks, constantly fixated on his smartphone screen. He often stayed back at the hotel, using his brother's laptop. On a day the group went to Lake Kawaguchi near Mount Fuji, Jeremy accidentally left his credit card in their hotel room. Seizing the opportunity, Grant hacked into Jeremy's account and withdrew thousands of dollars, spending it all on private sessions with his favorite webcam model. Jeremy discovered the theft later, but initially suspected fraud. He couldn't pinpoint the culprit and continued to investigate the incident after returning home, unaware that Grant was responsible. Sylvia Venceslavova Sylvie. Now let's delve into the most intriguing part, the identity of the mysterious webcam model who became an obsession for Grant. On a site where Grant paid for private online interactions with various women, he met the stunning Sylvia Venceslavova from Bulgaria, known as Sylvie. She captivated him with her striking looks, confidence, charisma, and passion. Sylvie made Grant feel special, loved, desired, and unique. He began to believe that her feelings for him were genuine, and they could have a real relationship. Grant was convinced they were in a relationship, and he needed to win over this fiery brunette from all her other admirers. He spent hours and thousands of dollars daily to ensure she had no time for other men. Grant also showered her with gifts like expensive lingerie and jewelry, which she would wear during their video chats. Desperate to impress Sylvie, Grant constantly fabricated stories, losing touch with reality. He claimed to live alone in a large house, own a successful business, and could afford to lavish her with money. He backed up his claims with money transfers, initially sending a couple of $1,000s, then $10,000 and even $100,000 as a birthday gift. Naturally, Grant's lavish spending didn't go unnoticed by his parents, as he was using their accounts. At first, he explained it as investments in his own online project to attract an audience, but Chad and Margaret quickly realized their son was lying. Scandal, escape, and rehab clinic. A serious family dispute erupted at home. The patriarch demanded that the youngest son immediately pack his things and leave, but his mother and Cody intervened on Grant's behalf. The family understood that Grant was suffering from severe internet addiction. However, they were baffled about how he had spent nearly $200,000 from their accounts. A thorough search in his room uncovered vials of potent substances. Grant explained he used them to keep from going insane. The parents announced they would cut off his access to their accounts and intended to send him for mandatory treatment for drug and internet addiction. In response, Grant declared he was tired of everything and ready to end his life. He then dashed out of the house, jumped into his car, and sped away at high speed in an unknown direction. Later, it was discovered that Grant went to his aunt and uncle's house, crashed through their fence, and hit the garage wall. Aware of the turmoil in the Amato family, his relatives sympathized with him and offered him a place to stay until things settled. He readily agreed, but robbed his kind-hearted relatives the next day, stealing thousands of dollars from their accounts to pay for interactions with Sylvie. When Grant's aunt informed his parents, they asked her not to call the police, promising to resolve the situation and return the stolen money. That same day, Chad personally went to their house and took Grant, who urgently needed intervention. Chad, Margaret, and Cody realized that reasoning with him was futile, and if he left home, he would likely commit theft again. They then presented Grant with a different ultimatum. Either he would go to a rehabilitation clinic for treatment of his addictions or face jail time for theft. Reluctantly, Grant agreed to enter the clinic, where he would spend 2 months away from any temptations. He was admitted to the medical institution at the end of December 2018. The grown man's little secret while Grant was in treatment: his parents checked his computer and discovered where their son was spending thousands of dollars daily from their family accounts. They found the profile of Sylvie, the woman who had deeply affected their son, reviewed their correspondence, and found hundreds of recordings of their intimate private online interactions that Grant treasured and often revisited. The Amatos decided to inform Sylvie that her admirer, who had showered her with money and gifts, was not a businessman but an ordinary unemployed man with drug and internet addictions. They also pointed out that the funds Grant transferred to her were stolen, potentially subjecting him to criminal charges. However, Sylvie remained indifferent. As for her, it was just a job and she had no intention of returning the money. The unexpected return on January 5, 2019, just a couple of weeks into his treatment, Grant made an abrupt return home, having completed less than a quarter of the necessary rehabilitation program. He had fled the clinic, where he was noted for his complete lack of compliance. Grant tearfully vowed to turn his life around and find employment, but threatened to end his life if forced to return to the rehab center. His parents agreed but laid down strict rules. Grant was barred from using the computer, had to follow a strict schedule, and all his earnings were closely monitored. Additionally, he was given a part-time job at a local grocery warehouse. For about 3 weeks, Grant seemed to comply, leading his parents to believe he had matured and left his addictions behind. However, everything changed on Thursday, January 24, 2019, when Grant persuaded his mother to let him use the laptop briefly to check his email and post his resume online, hoping to find a more ambitious job than his current warehouse position. Margaret trusted her son and allowed him to use the laptop, making a fatal mistake. Naturally, Grant first tried to contact Sylvie, only to discover that his parents had already written to her, exposing the truth about him. He saw this as a betrayal. Moreover, his parents had humiliated him in front of the only woman he loved, and they had to pay for that. The brutal takedown of family. Remember the previously mentioned home gun collection? Chad had kept it in a special large safe, the key to which he trusted no one. However, Grant knew about another gun stored in his parents' bedroom, always kept loaded by his father, and it was this gun he decided to use. His mother was sitting at the computer in the home office, when her youngest son quietly approached her from behind and shot her in the back of the head. The position of her body suggested she didn't even have time to turn around or understand what was happening. Next was his father, who was about to return home from work. As soon as Chad entered the kitchen, he was confronted face to face with Grant and immediately received 2 bullets to the chest. Grant tensely contemplated his next move, devising an even more monstrous plan. He decided to frame his own brother Cody, the only person who had always stood up for him, helped him, and been his best friend. By then, Cody had moved out of the family home and was living separately with his girlfriend. To lure Cody home, Grant used his now-deceased father's phone to send several messages asking him to come home immediately because something terrible had happened. He didn't elaborate, confident that this information would be enough to make his brother rush home from work. Grant's calculation was correct, and Cody indeed arrived, even leaving work early. Entering the house, he only made it to the bottom of the staircase leading to the second floor before being shot and collapsing. Cody didn't die instantly. He had time to realize the horror of the situation but was powerless to change it. After eliminating his family, Grant coldly wiped his fingerprints off the pistol, placed the weapon in his brother's hand to leave his prints, and then left it next to the body, making it look as if Cody had shot their parents and then himself. The rest of the evening, the killer calmly packed his things, downloaded video files of his communications with Sylvie from the computer, and even texted the girl. Having finished his affairs, he loaded his essentials into the car and drove away. Arrest and trial. It took the police just over a day to track down and arrest Grant, who was hiding in a small roadside motel in Orange County. He wasn't surprised, more disappointed that he was found so quickly, but he vehemently denied any guilt. During his interrogation at the station, he spun unbelievable tales about his father's incredible cruelty, alleging mistreatment towards him, his mother, and brother. Grant also spoke of his father's attempts to separate him from his beloved girlfriend Sylvie, whom he claimed to share true and pure love with. Regarding the events at their family home on the evening of January 24, 2019, his account was confusing and inconsistent. He suggested that his father and brother had a fight, Cody grabbed a gun, and ended Chad's life, with Margaret being an accidental victim. Grant claimed he could only guess the chronology of these horrific events, as he wasn't a witness himself, stating he spent the night in his car with his belongings after his father kicked him out. In the morning, he said he simply drove away, unaware of the tragedy that had unfolded at home. His story sounded disjointed and implausible, and the evidence indirectly pointed to him as the sole perpetrator. As a result, Grant was arrested as the primary suspect in the triple homicide of his family members. He was held on a $750,000 bond, which he was unable to post, and thus remained in custody awaiting trial. The trial commenced on July 15, 2019. Notably, almost all witnesses who testified in court spoke against Grant, including his older brother Jason, relatives, and Cody's friend Jeremy, whom Grant had stolen money from during their trip to Japan. Those who knew the defendant personally described him as prone to various addictions, a pathological thief, and a liar. The main piece of evidence against Grant was a significant bank transfer from Chad's account to his younger sons. This transaction occurred late at night, when all family members were already deceased. To confirm the transaction, the defendant had used his deceased father's finger for identification. The prosecution pushed for the death penalty, while his defense argued that Grant was ill and needed treatment. The final verdict was delivered on August 12, 2019. The court found 30-year-old Grant Amato guilty of first-degree triple homicide and sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. As the rain falls and the night deepens, thank you for being here with me at Radio Night Crime. True crime stories remind us of life's mysteries and the need to stay aware, even in the stillness of the night. If you enjoyed tonight's story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let the sound of the rain lull you to sleep, and until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and let the night keep you company.